this is the team that's presenting the third-party integrations. We have Joe, Tony, Sohail, Rupa, and myself. So as we started on a journey of discussing, like when we first met, trying to discuss what the third-party integration should look like for both Habu and Ketch, there was like a healthy tension in the room as to who's doing it, like who's doing it and why they're doing it this way, how they're going to do it. And you know, being a Western team, we thought the only way to resolve it would be gunfight.
I think it was the difference in color of the hat. That was the main point of contention.
That is a good segue, but we quickly realized, right? Any third-party integration, you know, it's basically there to solve a business use case. And how Rupak and I were like trying to get into it. Like, how would you classify that? So.
Yeah, so some of the common themes that we came out was it should have, it should be repeatable. It needs to be automated. So there are a lot of times when and I'll talk a bit about other companies where you can do it through the UI, but it's very difficult to automate. And then finally, it has to be scalable. It has to be something which you can do as you scale, as the number of integrations, the number of data points that you're sending, how can you make it scale?
Yeah. And the key piece also is like the access is restricted, and as to what you can get done is very limited when you're doing a third-party integration. So I'll hand over to Habu team to start.
Cool. Awesome. So I just want to give a quick update or quick view of Habu and where we do integration. So at Habu, we think of data in three parts. One is the source data, one is the processing data, and the third is the results data. So if you think about source data, when you get source data into the processing layer, into Habu, that is what is called ETL. And when you're in Habu and you're sending it to the activation partners, think of that as reverse ETL. So today, we're going to focus more on the reverse ETL part of it and how we are doing it, the data integrations around that. So, actually, we did research of a whole bunch of reverse ETL solutions that are available in the market. Most of this work was actually done by Shruti, but she could not come here, so I'm just presenting what she did. So we looked at a whole bunch of systems. There's sensors, there's some Airbyte, there is REST app, all of that. And we concluded, we had three main conclusions on it. Number one, most of these solutions have very limited partners. We have very limited integrations, and adding new partner is actually not very easy. You have actually, we discussed it with all. Shruti actually said, she sat down with the solutions team on their end, and we were talking about new integrations. It's very, very hard to. So they have figured out some integrations, but anything new is very hard for them to do. The next is API support. What they've done is, it's mostly through the UI. If you're trying to do a very simple integration, if you're just trying to send a very small list, 1,000, 2,000 kind of emails, it's easy. The setup is actually done through UI. They don't have API integrations. For our use case, when we're sending, and Tony and Joe are going to talk about the amount of data we send, it is actually not possible. And finally, there are limitations on the number of rows the number of rows that you can send. The cost becomes exorbitant. It's not very easy. It came to a point where we were like thinking, if we do this, I don't think we will ever be able to trade in Habu, because all the money will be spent in the data integrations. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Joe.
Alright, so we're talking about, I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Habu, but so we for our third-party integrations, we mainly rely on activating client data, a few different, what we call third-party partners, which indicates, in these cases, it's usually like different social media platforms, like our advertisers such as like Google, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, and so we support two separate use cases. There's a little bit of overlap, but there's some idiosyncrasies that make it quite separate. So we do customer match and customer audience user lists. So we have a platform. On our platform, we have functionality where it takes CRM data that clients upload, and then it filters out based on some filters that they customize and select. It produces a list of IDs, usually hams or sometimes mates, that they then can send to these third-party partners in order to support their activities. The second is offline conversion, which is kind of more of a feedback on kind of the effectiveness of campaigns on which contains transaction data and so and it's kind of more like a feedback on the effectiveness of these campaigns that they have. So the general flow for each of our use cases, at least from our user console, is that the client can manage and activate activation channels and credentials through this user console. So by managing, I mean like they can select which user list segment, which list of list of hams or mates they want to send to which partners, such as like Google or Facebook, and add their credentials and make sure they get sent to their specific account. And then once these activation channels are created, it maps the client's data into a form recognizable by these various third-party APIs. So just going through documentation, you can just kind of figure out how they want like the list of like hams or list of mates, what other parameters that you would put when you're creating these segments. And then our console has feedback presented to our clients through like time series graphs. So each day you can just see how many records were sent for each activation job. So this part is good. It's helpful for clients because they don't need to go to each of the app platforms in order to check how many records were sent. They can just come back and see for all different partners and for all their segments how many things were sent. So our activations are event intention. That's how they're instantiated. So there's various features on our platform are kind of interconnected with activation, or at least kind of encourage the clients to use it. It's very easy to set up. So we have it's easy to like just put data up onto our Habu AWS S3 bucket and create a segment about that, and able to, if you have already the third-party partner platform set up, you can just insert those credentials, and you can select the activation, and it's easy to kind of get your data from Habu to these various platforms. And essentially, it's a pretty prompt process as well. So we use Airflow in order to kind of manage when these jobs are occurring and just able to keep logs and just track them. So essentially, for clients, it allows them to act on their data for business purposes. In this case, for most cases, marketing. So this is kind of the general like activity flow of kind of what we do. So on the left-hand side, it is just a graph of what kind of starts these processes on the right. So usually, if they have if there is not an activation, if they don't have an activation channel for a user list, then once they insert their credentials and they insert like what partners they want to send this user list segment to, it creates an activation channel which triggers something that we have called the user list syncer, which kind of manages user list activation channels on our side and make sure that they're represented on the third-party API side. And so that just indicates kind of looking to see if it's there, seeing if the user list is up on that platform, just making a query. And then it sets user list parameters such as like identity space, make sure it's like a CRM user list, or like look back in such as like look back time, which is like how long these identities will stay within this audience segment on the partner platform. And then it executes the third-party API call in order to create the segment on the third-party platform, and in turn it returns something called the partner segment code, which is used so when we do send stuff or need to access it again, we can say like, hey, here's this code, and that's how we know what segment we're sending it to when we do send our IDs. So eventually it'll end up sending doing the user list sender, which consists of getting all the existing activation channels for a certain user list for each partner. So we get to each partner which one we want to send to. And so afterwards, it'll get the bucket location, like S3 bucket, and then in parallel, we both read the IDs from the bucket, and the reader does a good job of telling you what kind of ID space is in. And it adds it to a queue. So while that queue is being added, the queue is actually being emptied by another class called our user list sender, which adds it to another buffer, which does some, it sets the parameters of like what partner segment codes that we grab from the user with syncer. So it sets that there. It sets like what partner we're doing, what partner and job that we're supposed to be sending to. It does some filtering. Just based on right to be forgotten and such. And then adds for each partner, each third-party partner, it adds all these IDs to requests based on how the API is just kind of structured. So it adds all these APIs to like either a REST API request or some cases gRPC. And eventually, after that occurs, we execute those requests onto the third-party API, and we empty the buffer. Repeat the process until all the IDs in the bucket are empty. So now I should just give a quick demo. So we're on, I don't know if any of you guys in the room have been on it, but so we're on, so essentially we're on our Habu console platform. So I've created some credentials that are for Google Custom Map Super Summit. So the user would come in, insert such as parameters such as client customer ID, and for this case it's the name and it's Google. For some interesting issues, they need an app ID, but that's a little less important. So this client ID that the customer has, that they'll give you all these credentials, and we'll store them in our database to be able to pull them when we need to. So eventually, once you want to create a activation channel, you go to here, and then we have our you create a selection activation partner. This is based off the credentials that we made. So Google customer match, and you select what activation, one or more, that you want to do for that partner. And so that's going to be the activation segment. So you'll see it right here. However, once we move to the Airflow side, there's our user list syncer DAG. This polls every few minutes to make sure that everything's kind of synced up both from the API side and from Habu side, just to make sure. But I'm gonna just trigger that. Okay, this is. I'm going to plan.
It's all good. It makes me feel better.
Yeah, no worries.
That this is crashing. So
I
I feel great about Habu.
Actually, it's actually working now. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It was short-lived.
So, as you'll see, this is a process that's running, and if I look in within K9S, it's going it's creating this customer match like user list up here. So eventually, in like a minute or something, we're going to see reflect. This is our Google Ads account that I've taken this ID, and that's where I enter in the credentials, and so it's going to pop up here as well. Yeah, so test me user list. So that's that's the user list that we created right here, and it shows our partner, and so it's currently showing that it's kind of created up there. So whenever we send IDs, which it does immediately once it's created, because you can't create an activation off an empty segment. It's going to just send all these IDs through here, and then eventually, since it takes a little bit of latency outside because they're processing, but that's kind of, at least for the user of syncer, eventually it will start to show that it's processing. It'll be record set. Once you go to details, you'll see a time series graph. So that's kind of the demo for like one half of our kind of use case for third-party integrations. Though it's pretty similar on the it's pretty similar for offline conversions. But. All right, so just some important considerations, at least from lessons that I've learned over this process. Mainly regarding the third-party APIs, just kind of understand the current functionality of like what you currently do within your code base, and like assess changes needed to properly implement the third-party API. All this process takes a lot of documentation reading, kind of just like exert it for the third-party API, and just kind of like as you work more with it, you'll kind of get a a better knowledge of the code base and kind of will understand these capabilities. And the next point is understanding the capabilities, limitations, and constraints of the APIs. So how we have our activation structured is that we have a bunch of common classes up top, and then the third-party APIs are actually branched out at the bottom. So we have, if we just need to add a new partner, we have an abstracted class out that we can just add this another API to. However, all these APIs, despite trying to achieve a common goal, even like using kind of the same communication protocol, they all behave differently. So you kind of got to understand these nuances between each one in order to kind of make sure that everything runs smoothly, especially for the client, because it's stuff that, at least in our case, it's stuff that the client definitely sees. And last point on that is the potential downstream effects of updating and depreciating or migrating the API. You do want to make sure that they have really good documentation when you're doing this. It very much help. So if you're updating like a version that's been depreciated, just make sure that stuff how you're currently composing these requests, that it's not, you either make the change that's needed, you understand what's depreciated, or you just kind of do your due diligence and making sure that it tests well and that things are and that it's functioning as received. But however, you don't you don't know that when you're sending through, at least in our case, through these third-party platforms. So these third parties are at like our downstream for the on the party platform. We send to their upstream, but what the client sees is after some processing on their side, at the end, you don't know until that point whether the call has actually you successfully have kind of it's been a successful request, because depending on the API, which means the next point, not the third point, but it's just like different APIs have like different capabilities in their handling and responses. So even if you get like a 200 requests, it might not necessarily fit within the downstream. I kind of skipped the second point, but I kind of got branched in. But just abstraction. So just reworking your current design to fit future needs, especially if you're like doing previous, such as upgrading, depreciating, migrating. So in our case, it's important for scaling and maintaining our third-party API implementations, because we want to make sure that we don't need, if we're trying to change how, if we're trying to add a new activation API, we want to make sure that we don't need to change too much up top in order for it to get to work. If we do, we'll change if we need to, but it's just, you want to make sure that your design is kind of future-proof, I guess. And I think abstraction, at least in this case, will help out a lot. Third point, party integrity, investing effort in stability and inherently. Like I said, these APIs, they try to degree a very rigorousness on how robust their error reporting is. And again, you don't know until like on their third-party platform what the actual result is until they're downstream after they do some processing to data as well. And last point is just make sure to do your due diligence in the handling of client data, because you're dealing with client, you're not dealing with your data, you're dealing with it. So you just want to make sure there's not a spillover like between clients' data. You want to make sure that you do proper filtering and just make sure you do due diligence. So move on, Tony.
Thank you, Joe. So as you can kind of heard from both Rupak and Joe, doing integration is tough, right? So, and as from our client, they already building an ad platform is complicated and it's hard. Like especially when you're building an ad, so you can actually get your ad on your phone, on your laptop, so you get spam. Like it's just difficult to do to get all the spam onto your mobile. So now for our clients, they basically want to make sure once they set this up, the campaign and all they ask us for view and click, we want to make sure that we continue to send them in a scalable way, and then with the shortest processing time possible. So if Rupak already kind of touched base, we have built a kind of scalable service layer, and with data ingestions, customer segmentations, and of course now we're doing sending of emails. So in the next few slides, including this one, I'm going to talk about some of the lessons we have learned and the metrics we have captured. So the first order of the lesson that I have learned from working in activations, understanding the customers. So how many audience segments are they planning to have and build? Because that's a big unknown. And how many audience will probably fall into this segment. And lastly, the third is how many ad channels are they planning to have? Like a channel, the basic channel, you get the big five, you got the Google, the TikTok, the Snapchat, and Facebook. And each of them has their own ad account. So that's the big multiplier that a lot of times we forget. So for example, in Facebook, a gaming company can have an ad account for Call of Duties and live ops or even live ops premiere. So you just kind of find out. You never know what ESD, that ad account could be 5 or 15. So from a customer perspective, they cannot tell you either. So that's where I think one of the biggest challenge that we have faced when I work with the clients. So the one thing that we can do, so as you can tell, a basic segment that from a gaming company is 47 million, so 49 million. That's just one audience segment. So you have five channels on top of it. That already come out 245 million. That's the scale that we are basically targeting. And you times that by 50 segments, you are basically talking about really a huge scale that we are dealing with right now. And this is another reason why there's not a lot of third-party software out there that does what we do. So that's why we are doing it in-house. So now that kind of gives you some idea. What are we facing right now? So Joe kind of touched base on, we use Airflow to do a lot of orchestration and jobs. So, and since the inception that we have, about a year and a half ago when we first started, we've been growing exponentially. So now we are growing at about 5% month after month. And we are, in the month of July alone, we did over 2,000 Airflow jobs. So what is a job? Job is considered the channels and user organizations. So, and that's basically, we just keep pumping jobs, sending data out continuously throughout the day. So, this is kind of like something that you should plan in if you do activation with large partners on the scales. These are the questions that oftentimes we don't ask ahead of time, and that will be a bottleneck later on for you. And this is the scale that we've been working with. If you can tell, on a given week alone, we've been processing 1 billion users. So it's like, well, that's not enough. 1 billion is a lot of people, but you think about segmentations, the same user can be in multiple segments. So, and because from a client perspective in ad tech, they want to reach as many possible ways to get you an ad in your face. So this is critical. And this is something that oftentimes I personally discover people don't think about ahead of time. Because the first thing I always hear from people, there's not even 1 billion people online. No, and that's not how you should think. It's about how many segmentation you're heading. So that's the interesting metric that I got. So one thing that we have done, you can measure from an operational platform. We have rate, you have error that everybody knows whose platform engineer will understand. We should keep track. We have Datadog to log it. We got alert going to Slack whenever we can send something. But that doesn't really tell. For me, are we actually in a healthy situation? Are we sending all this data in time? So duration becomes my metric personally, and because you only get 24 hours in a day. So a portion of the day is already in ETL processing of new data coming in, and then you computing segmentation. So what I get is only about 12 to 13 hours left in the day to send all this out to all the channels that I have. And so I had, based on the trend, I got about 12, 13 hours before I get to what I call a metric justification threshold. If you take the first and then the J, it's basically my mumbo jumbo line. Because after that, you come into a problem that you may cross the daytime boundary of two jobs running at the same time. Yesterday's job that you want to push and today's jobs. When these two happen, the same email or same mobile ID could be at your partner system in different days. So now your partner may come back and say, how come your number is different than my number? And it becomes a very expensive and difficult exercise to kind of decouple or detangle, like, oh, by the way, because we are sending 4 billion and that's why we're crossing daytime. Oftentimes you cannot really identify the root cause of this. So this is something that I think, there's certain things that we can do, and there's certain things we cannot do. So one of the feedback I always get is just go concurrency up the wazoo. But people don't realize we have waiting limits on the client. It's not on us. So if we send too much, they give us a timeout. And then we couldn't do anything anymore. And then the more you pump to them, the more timeout you get. It's an exponential back off. And so that's really tricky because every partner is different. So now it's not just, oh, I built a platform, now you got to go detail catering to each of the partners. So how do we deal with it? So whenever I see a metric such as this, which is, going through the different conference, I know, we are eating our own dog food. We are using the data that is coming back and then import it from database, which is in Snowflake. So I think one of the best things about Snowflake that, there's a lot of conferences, I can literally create a lot of dashboard that is more usable than, let's just say, Datadog. And I could actually show these through Snowflake and a BI tool to our client to say, hey, this is your problem. Let's try to optimize together. So that's another piece that I think I have learned, that using our own infrastructures, and it doesn't always have to be hardcore metrics, measurement tools, and get something that's more user-friendly that you can actually generalize. And when this happened, I would sit down and kind of, hey, we just can't handle it. It's not because of technology, it's just because of the data volume. And I work with the clients on that to kind of reduce the flow. So I think that pretty much my presentation coming from an operational perspective. Thanks.
So, just great presentation here. Good. The rate and the scale that you're using, that's amazing. On the Ketch side, the agenda is going to be, we'll walk through our use case for third-party integrations, which we primarily use to impute data subject rights. Especially, we'll be focusing on the delete right for this presentation. Then we go over the temporal, which is the heart of our processing engine. A little bit detail, we dive onto the architecture on the Ketch side, and then a demo for the user. So just to get started and get people warmed up around like what Ketch does for our DSR use case. Ketch, as you all know, is into privacy, data compliance, and security space. And one of the way it's broken out, there are different jurisdictions like Europe, California, and each of these jurisdictions has a set of regulations, right? Like Europe has GDPR, California has CCPA, right? And most of these jurisdictions have a set of data subject rights. A right can be right to delete, a right to be forgotten, and right to access your personal data. So that's where Ketch comes in. The Ketch delete, this is like a typical Ketch delete use case where if, let's say, just to give you an example, hypothetically, one of our customers, UTC, injects a set of tags that are generated by Ketch on their page, they would see this under their preferences where, okay, any user for UTC or sandals has the right to erasure. So they would go under preferences and they would say, what are your privacy rights? And they would fill out this form which says, delete all the data that you have on me. Delete all the data that you have on me. And that would essentially create the rights queue for us, or the DSR queue for us, which what it does is first it goes and validates the user using our privacy portal to ensure the user is who he or she says they are. So we would go, right now we're using email for identity verification. We would use or zero password passwordless flow to go to our privacy portal, validate the user. Once the user is validated, now let's say our customer like Sandals is using for Google Analytics and Amplitude for their analytics engines, and they're using HubSpot for their marketing. Once we know that, we pick up the identity spaces for each one of them from the data layer on the customer's website, and then we use this identity to actually make a third-party API call to let's say Google Analytics, Amplitude, and HubSpot so that they can delete the data for the user. And the good thing is, as part of regulations, all these third parties are supposed to have the third-party API or either API or an email way to contact and get rid of, delete the data for the end user. So that's like a high-level overview of our DSR fulfillment. Of this, the heart of the flow is our workflow engine. And on the back end, what powers this is temporal. So I'll hand it over to Sohail to go over temporal.
Yeah. So essentially on Ketch, when you set up like your jurisdiction, all the rights that you're offering, you set up workflows which kick off for like when someone creates a DSR, and essentially we use temporal to like execute those workflows. So what is temporal? Temporal, you can like, if we go by the definition, it's like a runtime for managing distributed application state, or as I would like to call it, it's like task queues on like steroids, and not like your regular steroids. It's like you sleep skinny and like wake up swole. Steroids. So it's like it's awesome. Yeah. So we have like very long running workflows, and by long running, it could be like someone is using an app which doesn't like exactly deletes the data like at that moment. You have to like check up on it, like maybe like after a week. They have like a compliance step that they have to fulfill in like 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So either you have like a cron job, like okay, like this thing is like kicked off like 3 weeks back, and then like 3 weeks later I'm gonna check on this. Like in temporal, you can just like sleep, like sleep it for 3 days, 3 weeks, months, I don't know, years. So it's Reentron. So what do you mean by that? Resumable, recoverable, and reactive. Resumable, like I said, like you can suspend the workflow for like days, months, weeks, year, whatever. Recoverable. So workflows is just like a set of steps, set of tasks that you have like orchestrated. So if like any of your step like fails, it's very like super easy to recover from that error. Like you can just retry. You can have like a retry policy for your app for that particular step. That okay, like try it for 10 times and then like fail. Or you can have like exponential backup. Okay, like maybe you're hitting rate limit APIs, API rate limits. You can just like tell it okay, like every other try is going to be like the time between is going to be exponential. Try after 5 minutes and then 10, then 15, whatever, right? So it's recoverable and reactive. Say you have, whenever someone signs up, you kick off a onboarding workflow, which sends a couple of emails after like certain time, reminding user to like set up something. Say your user has like already done what you were going to send an email about. So you can just like send the workflow signal that okay, like that thing that you're waiting on, it's already done. So just like move on to the next step. So you can like,
That would be our identity verification.
yeah, like exactly. So this is what we do. Like whenever we suspend the workflow when we still have the user hasn't still identified themselves. So as soon as they do it, we send a signal to the workflow. Okay, the person is identified, and go to the next step. And the best thing about temporal is it lives. You can write workflow definitions in like Go, Java, PHP, Python. It is part of your application code. You can even not even actually you call it from an application itself. The code is part of your application. All you have to do is just have infrastructure where you just it's just one line to tell temporal that I want this particular workflow to be executed at this particular place, and then just call it your application. You don't even need to. You can have the definition in one place and then call it from anything else, as long as you can connect to that particular server. So it's like I said, taskless on steroid. So this is how you define a workflow. Workflow is nothing. It's just a step of activity of a collection of activities that makes up your workflow. For example, on onboarding, send a code for email for verification. When someone clicks that, put a bunch of onboarding data into set up the our console for them so that they don't have to struggle with setting up themselves. So it's just a couple of activities bunched up together, and that's what workflow is essentially. And what temporal does is because you don't write workflows to fail, so it ensures that your workflow executes deterministically and only once, right? And like I said, Rehontron with reactive, resolvable, and resumable. So then we have retry policy. So if you have you call a bunch of APIs, you hit the rate limit API or your API is down. So what you can do is you can have a retry policy that execute this n number of times, and after this backup efficient that the first time is going to be after 5 minutes, the next is going to be after 10. So you have this is just a glimpse of the options that it provides. You can even run cron jobs. You don't need to necessarily have a cron script or something like that. I mean, you can just start it off and it will run on its own. However, you set it up. And then you have activity timeout. So you want your activity to finish, right? You don't want it waiting for infinite time. So you can configure it to with the parameter schedule to close. This is the total time that your activity from start to finish is going to live on Chorus. Then you have start to close. This is the execution of your activity. It can sit in the queue, and that will eat up your schedule to close. But start to close is the time that actual execution happens. And then you have schedule to start. It's the time that your activity, your workflow sits in the task queue. So essentially, these options gives you a deterministic way for you. It gives you a deterministic way to execute your workflows. You have very fine control over how your workflow is actually being executed. So then
to summarize over here, right? I mean, your temporal code lives or is part of your code that you're writing, right? I mean, you have a temporal client where you define your workflow definitions, which are deterministic inside which you define the activities that you want to take care of. And for each activity, you have timeouts and retries. That's your temporal client, right? And once this temporal client is written as part of your code, you send commands over to the temporal server, which are mostly over gRPC. And the temporal server has a set of temporal workers. Workers are nothing but a special instance of temporal clients, and they are special because they must register to exactly one workflow type, and they should have a task queue associated with it. So these workers are actually responsible for pulling the task queue, picking up the tasks, and executing the tasks. Once the tasks are executed, they would send the results back to the temporal server. The only thing that's required over here or recommended is a workflow process is the one that requires all the access that it needs, like access to the external APIs, access to any of the like your tokens or whatever is required to make those calls, or access to Auth0 to make sure that it can authenticate. So this is like how we summarize temporal, and then going forward into the architecture of sorry about that. The next, like, we just covered the core APIs over here for temporal. A temporal can do a lot more than provide these APIs. I mean, it is battle tested by Uber. It was developed by Uber initially and open source to that. And the Go is what Uber is primarily a Go shop, so it was primarily written in Go, and Go is the most battle tested over there. But apart from these core APIs, I mean, if you look at it, it has multiple security options. Your Auth0, your Auth10, and Auth maintenance is like it has different testing and versioning that they have. It's also production ready in terms of that it provides you all the matrices for logging, monitoring, and also it's coming and it's constantly being developed. The community is active. They're coming up with multi-cluster. It's archival. So that's just a good summary of like what temporal can do. I mean, we just covered the core APIs based on given the time that we have, but yeah.
Right. So we're going to go over like how the DSR works, works, the architecture like works for us. So Shoreline is a microservice that we have, like it's an API gateway where like our customers send their consent and like DSR requests. Whenever a DSR comes in, we have another microservice called like Gangplank, which is the DSR fulfiller and DSR queue. It's like Shoreline falls into that. So it creates the log for like audit and compliance, and then just puts the request in queue. And then we have a microservice called Boson, which picks up this DSR, and what it does is like it determines from customer configuration that okay, for this particular jurisdiction, this particular right, whatever they have workflows they have configured, it kicks them off. And like I said, like all our workflows are temporal, so it goes to temporal. We have like different kinds of workers that are like sitting there, depending on how the customer has like configured the workflow. It can be third-party apps like that they have like configured, or it could be just like sending out an email. So we have like different workers for that. Gangplank worker is the one which does the third-party API stuff. So what it does is it just like gets a request, and because our webhooks are stateless, we're going to talk about that. It forms a request that it's going to forward to the third-party app from our database called commissary. Because we're storing like tokens and all that, we have like we store encrypted tokens in Vault. It forms a request, and then finally forwards it to our webhooks. So webhooks are how we have architectured these webhooks is we want them to be like stateless, and they're reactive. Like they just like receive a like a request, and they do the needful to fulfill the DSR. And what it allows us to do is like whenever a new request from customer comes in that, okay, I need this app in the marketplace. So like most of it's like boilerplate code. We deploy to staging apps in like a day or two. Like it's like super simple. Once it does, it's like super easy to test out how everything is like architecture. So like we're developing apps like every day. So yeah. So Webpack receives the request. It has like all the authentication token and whatnot, like what it needs to call the API. In fact, like we use temporal in our apps also. Like sometimes like there's like a lot of API calls involved to fulfill that DSR. It's not that simple. Like it's not just like a endpoint like okay, delete this particular user. It's like for example for Twitter, we need to determine that like a particular Twitter ID belongs to an ad campaign. So we first will get all the ad campaigns, like figure out if the person is like part of that ad campaign, and then delete the user from those ad campaigns. Sometimes like I said, it can be asynchronous in that case. So we use temporal in there too, like mostly for asynchronous stuff. So yeah, this is how we have like architecture. It's quite complex, like inside, but like this is very simplified. And I have a demo for you. I hope it works. So essentially, this is how our workflow is like configured. It's a directed acyclic graph. You can have like it's very configurable. You can, for example, you can have like multiple lead things in like parallel. You can have like a decision gate. Like we have like so many apps in our app store, but right now like for the demo app, I set it up like to do identity verification and then delete the user from the segment. And you'll see that I'll only put in my email, but we pick up identities like from the customer's website, and because not everybody works on email. Like it's not that like Suhail@ketch.com exists on segment. It might be some like ID for me. It could be 1234 that like matches with my like Suhail@ketch.com. So we pick that up too. Our customer has like deployed the Ketch tag. They will have the banner where you can go and like actually create the DSR. So I've like already filled up the form, and I'm just going to submit it. Right. So like I said, we do the identity verification code and then limit link. So if I go here, I should have.
So while it's coming up, I saw a whole list of apps there.
Right.
So are you guys integrated with all of them or?
Yep. So it depends on, so right now these apps are only for delete, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so we have access also. So it's not too many apps for access, but we're like constantly working on it. So how it's like architecture, it's like we don't have to like re-architecture the whole thing. It's just like we just like write one file, okay, to access. So like I said, like for Google Analytics, like it took me like 2 days.
Yeah, but they have API so that you can send that and you get it all there.
Yeah. So all these apps that are listed can be accessed for.
So I imagine your customers have to OAuth separately into all of those apps?
Yeah.
And do you write code to generate these apps? Because LinkedIn was specifically deleting, so you would have that custom.
Right,
That's a third party integration. That's like we get the APIs, we understand the APIs first, and then integrate that as part of our code to that third party webhooks. And that's how we, like for Twitter, you were mentioning, right? I mean, first you have to pull in the campaigns, and then once you get the campaigns, so basically you have to understand your customer or know your customer.
So every specific app will have different business logic.
Yes.
How many of these apps are being used by clients? I think all of them, or you
so-
build based on clients, or?
Yes, yes, a lot of these requests come in from clients. All of them kind of are, most of them are coming from the request from the client. And then I think our product team has done a great job on identifying and balancing out, what is the number of ads requested versus what is being used. So, and there's constant increase in the number of apps we supported. For example, this year, our goal is to add 45 more apps based on the customer.
So somebody edited, even despite like I said, like do not edit. Yeah, so you got the email, like this is how we verify the identity. Like we send an email out, like you can customize this, and then like you got the button for like confirm identity. And then you go to our privacy portal, you have to log in, like because you just don't want like anyone to delete like anyone else. So log in. It's a
We're gonna expect either.
Or is it? Right, we are verified and it should be completed in a second. Yep. How do you verify? It's completed. You go to segment, you'll see the request hopefully. Yeah, 10:51 a.m. Yep.
This is actually one of the segment is one of the apps that we support.
Right.
And some of these apps let us go in and like have a UI where you can see what are the DSRs of the page.
Yeah, we just wanted to show that like actually like propagated, like your request is like created. So yep.
There's no like smooths and middle. Okay, you're done, but we run the back.
Yeah, like we have to like compliance, right? So yeah, like segment, we deleted the user for segment, and now like if you want to see like how a DSR like actually looks like, and what else I do. So you remember like I just like put in like Sohail +7@ketch.com, but actually we picked like lots of identities, like whatever you have like enabled like in the configuration. So for segment particularly, this was like user ID. I set it up like manually, but there's like if people like our customers will be doing it like in the code automatically to identify a user. So yeah, like we pick that up, forward to like Shoreline, the API, and then like we have like mapped, like it's not that like we every app like gets the request that okay, like only if the identity matches. Like if this is like present, we don't call the window. Like there's no point, like no point in increasing those resources. So yeah,
This is on demand, right? It's on demand. You don't send in batches. Like if there were 10 requests from you, do you batch them when you send to these, or?
To the, for example, are you saying like at a.com, like some 10 people come and they send like
Correct.
10 DSRs,
Right.
and so no, like one by one, like webhook like just one request per workflow essentially. Like I said, like we use temporal so that like it's executed only once.
And it also depends on like how the workflow is set up. Like
Right.
we want to, some of them like we want to send one after another. We want to send everything in parallel, so it can go accordingly.
Yeah.
So you have to be deleted. That means you have to be deleted from Ketch as well, right?
Not necessarily.
We don't do we collect like
We
we're not
don't- yeah,
collecting
yeah.
the data, right?
Like, well, this page.
Oh, like this is for audit, right? Like you have to keep this data for audit. Like else, like nobody's going to know that you actually did it.
And you keep that indefinitely?
That I'm not sure.
So what we are deleting is the customer data, right? I mean, when you're talking about customer data, is the data that you have to delete from the end user's website. But all the regulations have the specific clause that you can leave the information in there that is required for the business, right? I mean, so like tomorrow, if the same user comes back and says, hey, you didn't delete my data, or what is the proof that you deleted my data, we have to keep this for audit and compliance reasons, right? And apart from this, we don't have, like, Ketch as a platform in general, the idea is we don't have any of the customer data. We just collect the identity from the identity space at the time on demand as requested.
So we have like, like actually audit, like, so like, whoever is like auditing the company, they can like, just come in and search like, if you have like actually deleted the person or not. So yeah, we have to keep that data, definitely. Something we have to do. Cool. So yeah, like so this is like us taking it, so everybody's like taking around with it. So yeah, like this is it. You step forward. It's super awesome. It's very fun.
Thank you.